Greetings, R. Frederick Riddle with another episode of Christian News and Views. Today is Recap Friday. This is episode 30, which is an accomplishment in a way. This has been an interesting week. Let's take a look at it and recap some of the moments that we have talked about. This past Monday, the big news of the day was President Biden pardoned his son. Now, in this episode, I explained the presidential power to pardon. It goes all the way back to the beginning of the president of our country, actually. But in this particular case, the president pardoned his son, Hunter, for crimes he committed, been convicted of, charged, or may be charged with in the future of having committed. Now, you might debate the merits of the pardon, but the power is the president's to make, the power to pardon. It has been used since the founding of our nation, with President George Washington being the first president to actually use it. In that case, there were a couple of men who had participated in the Whiskey Rebellion, and he pardoned them. And so it's part of our history, part of our form of government, and it's perfectly within the rights of the sitting president to pardon people for different crimes. And it was kind of revealing that you could actually pardon somebody for crime charges that might appear in the future. And so that is what took place. On Tuesday, we continued that thought because now we were getting reactions from it, especially from the Democratic side, his own party. And their reaction to this presidential pardon was widespread, covering a lot of different thoughts and things of this nature. And there were some who were actually opposed, upset with this whole scenario. So you might ask yourself, why? Why were they upset? I mean, it is a right of the president to do this. Well, their being upset had nothing to do with the Constitution. It had to do with the fact that they wanted to be able to continue their charges against Trump. It didn't matter to them whether the charges were real or not. Just about every charge that's been out there has either been of a minor thing or it has been non-existent or trumped up. Excuse the play on words. And when it gets to higher courts that actually look at the facts, they get tossed out. And I think I mentioned the fact that the charges against Trump, the lone conviction, that even that might get tossed out. It is decades old, the whole thing. Not the conviction, but what he was convicted of. And they came up with a lot of suppositions. You got to understand how Democrats think. You think of it this way. I read a book once that had nothing to do with Democrats, but it had to do with creation, actually. And in this book, what it did is in chapter 1 of the book, it theorized a certain possibility of how the world, aliens had been involved in the creation of the world. And chapter 2 continued that thought a little bit. By the time you got to chapter 3, chapters 1 and 2 were being treated as fact. When you got to chapter 4, now chapters 1, 2, and 3 were treated as fact. And supposition after supposition became facts. So that by the end of the book, you had all these facts, which weren't facts at all. They were suppositions. Well, that kind of was how the Democrats do things. They make charges. They don't really worry about the facts. But if people do want to check out the facts, they make them up. And it's up to us to prove them wrong. And a lot of times they get away with it because no one actually bothers. In the press, they are friends of the Democrats, and they don't really do their research, do the job they're being paid to do, really. But occasionally, the truth comes out. There's an old saying, the truth always comes out, and usually it does. Usually sometimes it's too late to do anything with, but it does come out. It's just like the 2020 election. When charges were made of fraud and so forth, it was dismissed out of hand by politicians, by people in the government, by the media. But as time has gone by, more and more information has been made into the public stream and into the courts, which is where it should be in the first place. And so, but the truth is slowly creeping out. And that is the thing that it's going to take patience for the whole truth to come out. But the thing is, the Democrats and the liberals gained an upper hand. They got to rule for 4 years. You can't take that away from them. They ruled for 4 years. And in that 4-year period, we as a nation suffered. And so the good news is that before they took power, Trump had been in power, and he had brought a lot of things. They like to talk about how the rich got richer. Well, the poor got better off too. My situation, I'm not a rich person, not at this point in time, and I'm not anticipating becoming a rich person. I want to be successful in what I do, and Trump made that possible. I want to worship my God the way God says to worship him. Trump made that possible. There are a lot of things that when his first administration he made possible for the little man, the middle class man, as well as the rich man. It was over the whole spectrum. So when your tax cuts come, and they came and the Democrats said, well, the rich got richer, but the poor got poorer, was not a true statement. Yes, the rich got richer, but the poor got better off as well. And most of us at that time, when the election came around in 2020, if we were asked that, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? I would have said yes, definitely. Most of you probably would have said the same thing. There might be exceptions, but most of us would have said we're better off. Now, 4 years later than that, excuse me, are we better off? No. Some have kept their heads afloat. I have managed to, with thanks to the Lord, working in my life and bringing people into my life that have surrounded me. When my wife passed away, that's not the Democrats' fault there at all. But people surrounded me, helped me out, and so forth. Our Christian love, and so things. I can actually say I'm better off now than I was at least a year ago. But that's because God got involved in my life. He's been involved in my life. Don't get me wrong. He's been in my life ever since I got saved in 1973. But when I was forced to depend solely on Him, and there was a moment when I was, that changed my life in many, many ways, in a positive way. And so I can honestly say I'm better off now. But it's not because of any government policy. It has to do with God Himself. But the nation itself has suffered in the past 4 years. And now we have a president-elect, and we're already starting to see stuff happen. And I'm going to get to that in a moment. So, but the problem is that the Democrats, when they looked at this presidential pardon, now they couldn't attack Trump the way they wanted to. They wanted to be able to make him look bad. Instead, he comes out looking good. They want to be able to go after him on different things, and now that's going to be more difficult, not necessarily impossible. They always seem to find a way to do something. But it's looking much better than it has ever looked before since Biden got into office. And now Trump is about to take action. It's, by the way, this has nothing to do with a recap, but I do find it interesting. I just saw in the paper, I believe it was yesterday's or today's, it was talking about big, Trump's going to do this and that, and it's written by a liberal, and they don't have a clue what he's going to do. They make up things. There's issues out there that are just not really issues. They made them up, or they seized upon something that somebody else said or did and attribute them to Trump. Moving on. On Wednesday, I talked about Wall Street. The news was that Wall Street, or the stock market, had a stellar year so far in 2024. And I explained that though that was true for stocks, it was not true about the economy as in general. Experts on the economy have been very positive about the state of the economy. But you got to understand, experts deal with numbers. They don't necessarily look below the numbers. At least it doesn't seem that way when you read their reports. If they do read it, they dismiss the more negative stuff. Because if they had looked, they would have seen that these numbers were skewed by the type of jobs, for instance, that were created. They were not necessarily good, solid jobs that are usually what stirs the economic pot here in America. Most of them, a lot of them, were jobs in the food industry, fast food industry at that. Jobs down there on the low end. People who were used to working at higher wages went and got jobs at lower wages. That's not a positive trend. But that's the way they looked at it. They looked at the numbers. And so these jobs over here were lost, and then they moved over here and they were up higher. And the fact that these were people who had been up here, dropped down here, and now we're here, they look at that as a positive factor. Positive would be either even or above. And so you got to read between the lines. You got to understand these people deal with numbers, not necessarily with people. So their conclusions do not match the average American's experience. Inflation is up at the local marketplace. It's up at the gas station. It's up all across our spectrum of where we go to shop, the life in general. We are finding things more expensive. We are finding insurance going up. Now, you can say, well, that's the insurance company's fault. Well, that you can blame it on insurance companies. They certainly deserve some. But they were encouraged, I believe, that they were encouraged by the do-nothing. That's what I'm going to call it. I think in the future I'm going to call it the do-nothing Biden administration. Or the Bidenomics. But getting back to the stock market itself, that is a predictor. It predicts the future. So that is good news. It's predicting it for 2025 primarily. It's been going on for most of the year. Now here's a theory. It's just a theory on my part. That people were seeing Trump out there, and they knew he was going to run, and then when he did run, they were, I don't know if they were confident, but they suspected the possibility of his getting reelected, and so they may have started preparing for that eventuality, much like I believe they did in 2016. 2016. The very day, or within 24 hours of his election, we started seeing announcements business announcements of things, expansions, job hires, and stuff like this that I don't think were going to be mentioned unless Trump got elected. And so the thing is, now we see the same thing happening, maybe a little bit slower than it did then, but it's happening. And AT&T is one of the reasons, one of the companies I talked about, they were repurchasing their own stock, which is a positive sign. On Thursday, I talked about problems involving the KJV, King James Version Bible. So I began my Thursday episode with an apology because I had mistakenly said that the Texas Receptus had roots back in Ephesus. I should have said Antioch. That was a mistake on my part. When I went back and checked my notes, I caught that, and so then I made my apology. Consider it sort of like in the press apologizing, except that they put their apology in small print, usually not on the first page. Sometimes they do, but usually it's on an inner page. I put mine up there right up in front. I then talked about the language of the New Testament, Koine Greek, or Koine Greek, however you want to pronounce it. That language is now considered a dead language, and few, if any, know it. And if they do know it, it's probably just to read it. They may be able to write it, but it's more likely probably not, and I'm pretty sure they don't know how to talk it. I pointed out that to use classical Greek, or what's called Demotic or Demotic Greek, which is an offshoot of Koine Greek, to criticize the translation of Koine Greek is not only deceptive, but foolish. That would be like, well, the American language is called English, and it comes out of England's English. Now, they like to criticize our English. And you might say they have the right since it sprang out of it. But the two languages, they're two separate languages. And for them to try to interpret it based on their language would be rather foolish. You need to know our English to be able to interpret our English. And it is a very difficult one when you have one word can mean so many different things. So then I moved on from there to textual criticism, where they were criticizing the Bible, and they would use, there were 3 rules. Whether they developed these rules on their own or somebody just looked over how they did things and came up with these 3 rules, that's immaterial, but it's interesting to know because these 3 rules are this. 1, the oldest reading or copy is the best. Number 2, the majority reading is the best. And then you move on to number 3, your opinion, bias, and preference can override rules 1 and 2. So let's back up. Rule number 1, the oldest reading or copy is the best. Everything out there is a copy. Even I can't think. My mind, sometimes I forget things, but everything out there is a copy. It's easy, and some of the oldest ones of the copies, if you want to go that route, are actually not true copies in that they would take their own bias and they changed things. They added text and so forth. And so the whole concept there of a copy, the oldest copy, falls flat. Now the thing is this, a copy is a copy. And if you don't have any translation rules in place, then you don't have much to work with. The truth of the matter is, the King James, for instance, goes out of the Texas Receptus, and I showed to you in previous podcasts the translation of the Bible. The Old Testament was done with what's called Masoretic text, and then later on, that practice that they used for translating, for copying, was moved over to the Christian community, because many of them got saved. They took their knowledge with them, and they started doing the same thing, copying the Word of God and making sure that every letter of every word was correct. Well, that's not true with those that came out of Alexandria, Egypt. If you do this study on it, it doesn't look like it was ever true coming out of Alexandria. Even the originals, they were not diligent in how they did things. Rule number 2 says the majority reading is the best. So you have your oldest, and now you may have a disagreement or a debate as to which one of those older readings, maybe even as which one is older. So then you say, okay, the majority rules. And I demonstrated, I said, okay, everybody, let's vote on it and see who. Well, that you don't do that in translation work. That is stupid. I can't think of a better word for it. It's outright stupid to even think that that is a legitimate way of translating God's Word, especially considering the majority rule is usually wrong. Then here we come with the third one. You're not satisfied with rule 1. You're not satisfied with rule 2. So you go to number 3. Your opinion, your bias, or your preference can override rules 1 and 2. Now, come on, folks. You don't do translations based on your opinion. That makes your translation nothing more than your opinion. And it's not worth anything beyond you. You may value it highly, and maybe your friends value it highly, but after that it kind of diminishes. So those 3 rules themselves are invalid, and we can ignore them. So I move on from there to speak about a misconception that many people have about the King James Version Bible. So there are some people who believe in the King James Bible, but they always make the statement that it is the only Bible, period. And the idea is that if, say, you live in France or Spain, you must have an English Bible. Otherwise, you don't have the Word of God. Well, that's foolish to begin with, because not everybody can get a English Bible or be able to read it. They would have to learn how to read English to be able to read it. The truth of the matter is that those of us who believe in the King James Version Bible, the majority of us, we believe that the King James Version Bible is the only Bible for English-speaking people. So if you live in France, get yourself a French Bible. There is a French Bible that is based upon the Textus Receptus. There is a Spanish Bible that is based on the Textus Receptus. And you go to other countries, other languages, and see the same thing. So the thing is this, each language needs to have the Bible in their language and have an accurate version of it. And that's where the Textus Receptus comes in, because it traces it's the same language. It's in Koine Greek originally, and then it got translated to English or to French or Spanish. The people who translate it into English are far and away better scholars than any of these critics could ever hope to be. They may have all sorts of letters behind their names, but I've never heard of any of them being able to read, write, and speak Koine Greek. One reason is because Koine Greek is dead. And so they would find that very hard to do. Like I said, there might be an exception here and there. There might be a handful of people who can actually read it. Whether they can write it, and certainly whether they can speak it, is a totally different story. The truth is that there exists other Bibles equally reliable in these other languages. When I mentioned the Spanish, I believe there's the same idea exists in the French. I mentioned the French, the Chinese, Japanese. We have missionaries that go into different countries, and what do? They translate the Bible into their local dialect. There's a ministry right here in the United States that prints Bibles in other languages. Now, they are very faithful, and so just as the King James, they only print King James English Bibles. They only print other Bibles which are based on the Textus Receptus. Why? Because all other English versions are corrupt. They have real errors, not assumptions and stuff like that, but they have real errors. And I'm not even talking about printing errors. Those can exist. But real errors, doctrinal errors, and they stem from a corrupt beginning in Alexandria, Egypt. I believe the originals that came out of Alexandria themselves were corrupt. So that is my recap for the day. And if you enjoy this channel, enjoy my take on different things, why don't you just down below here subscribe, or if you want, follow, or both. If you follow, I believe that you'll get it'll go directly to your email with a link, so you can click onto the podcast or whatever, the latest one. Or if you subscribe, it will go. The podcast will go directly to your own YouTube channel. So you have a great day. I will see you next week and in the next episode. You have a great weekend.